started out as a weekend minder of the gallery, and at the time I was doing a Polytech design and art degree diploma, not even that, certificate, at Wairarapa Polytech, and they were looking for people to be paid in the role. They'd had volunteers up till then. They wanted people who would be paid to mind the gallery at weekends and who would know something about what was going on in the gallery and be able to talk to visitors about the exhibitions and so forth. So I got a job doing that, and then that job expanded when the current director left, and they took on a team of people to install exhibitions and to take care of that side of the operation of the art centre. So I was taken on a bit for more than just weekend minding at that point, and it expanded from there, and the new director was appointed in the end of 97, Richard Arledge, who was going to carry the rebuild project through. He decided he wanted me to be involved more, and the job just grew then, really.
How many staff did Aratoi have then?
There was a director, an administrator, and there was me and a couple of other people who did weekend days as well at that point. But that was in the old art centre, and it was before the development of Aratoi. It was in the process of being worked on, like feasibility studies and looking at what people wanted in the new gallery. But one of the main reasons for building a new museum was to look after a growing collection, which was in pretty bad storage in the old art centre. It desperately needed proper storage.
And so what is the collection manager's job? Did it actually evolve once this place was built?
Well, I was involved in the whole the moving of the collection from the old art centre, packing everything and moving it into temporary storage while the new gallery was built. And then also during that time that we were in between buildings, involved in the fit-out of the collection store, working out what we needed in the space and how things were going to fit in the space. And it was a bit different because the collection store was reduced in size from what it was meant to be in the original plan, and also in the original plan it had a mezzanine that was taken out to save money when the place was built. And a few years later we had to empty the collection store and build a mezzanine so that we'd had painting racks to accommodate the Rutherford Trust collection when that was put on long-term loan here.
So what facilities are available in here to make sure that the collection stays in good condition?
Well, the whole space is climate controlled. It's very well insulated. Climate control, insect and pest control. We have Rentokil comes and patrols the space and looks, we've got little traps and things in here to keep an eye on anything. Storage is all, it's powder-coated shelves so you get no rust. Objects are supported and tied to the shelves so they don't go falling over in an earthquake. All the materials that we use for storing the collection are quite specialised, like they're acid-free fabrics and card, and everything has to be neutral pH, so it doesn't affect the objects that it's touching and protecting. And that's quite an expensive business. All those materials cost a lot, and so we're constantly reusing. We're very resourceful in this museum. We have to do that all the time.
Most people are under the impression that putting on an exhibition simply means coming in here, grabbing a few things and then nailing them up to the wall in the main gallery, but the reality is a lot more complicated, isn't it? Could you explain that process?
Yes, it's variable. There's quite a lot of looking at the objects and selecting the best objects to tell the story that you're telling in the exhibition, and that applies to um, historical objects like the social history collection, textiles, all those sorts of things. Also the taonga Māori collection, which there's a whole other set of criteria because you're looking at whether things are relevant to this area. If it's an exhibition about this area, we want objects that relate to the Wairarapa, and we have a lot of those in the collection, the taonga Māori collection. We're seen, I think, by local good guardians of their taonga, and things are often placed here when families can't always agree on who should be the guardians of kaitiaki for those objects, and so they are happy for us to look after them, and we give access to iwi and access to any members of the community really who want to come and see what's in the collection store, because there's so many things here we can't have out on permanent display. And at the moment I'm working on a big exhibition for the main gallery of landscapes from the collection, and we've been doing a lot of work for that. There's the selection process, because not every landscape in the collection is going to appear, and there's also been a lot of framing and tidying up done, matting and mounting and framing of things that aren't framed so that they can be part of the exhibition. But the whole selection process, you have to think about what you're putting in, how the different works relate to each other, what story they tell about landscape painting. It's not just Wairarapa works, we have other artists in the collection who, like Colin McCann, Doris Lusk, other nationally important artists who will be, whose work will be shown. Every piece that's going into this exhibition, there is going to be a note on the label saying how they came into the collection. We're reliant very much on donations and gifts because we have a minimal budget for purchasing. When I first started working here, we had a budget of $1,500 a year from the Phoebe Monsell bequest, which was put towards collection purchases, and you can imagine 1,500 doesn't go very far. That has increased, but only recently, but it's still not very much, and we are reliant on gifts. The Pryor family have been a great benefactor of this collection over the years. Ian Pryor in particular, who would often suddenly appear with an artwork that we had no idea it was arriving, and something would arrive on the back of a ute, and it was very exciting. It was something that Ian had seen and thought, oh, that'd be nice at the art centre, and bought it and donated it to us. So we have quite a big collection of works that come under the heading of the Norman Pryor Bequest Collection, because that was the umbrella under which Ian bought these works. And Owen has also purchased works for the collection, Owen Pryor, and his sister has given a McCann, a double-sided McCann, which at the moment is in the Portrait Gallery in Wellington.
What would your views be on selling the collection to fund Aratoi?
That is an absolute no. That's not what you do with collections. No museum would sell their collection to fund the operations of the place. It has happened in the past here. I know that it happened in the late 80s. Some collection works were sold and the money was used for operational funding. Generally, this is not a collection that belongs to the museum as such, or to the board. It is a community asset, and it is here for the benefit of the community, not to be sold for so that we can operate the museum. That's a nonsense to even suggest it.
What happens if something gets damaged in the gallery?
Well, it's an absolute disaster, really. We work very hard to make sure that doesn't happen and how we secure objects in the gallery. We have had a recent incident where something was seriously damaged, and we are going to have to make good the object that was damaged at our expense, of course. It's not something that we want to happen, and we work very hard to prevent that, really. And this was an unexpected event where a child was not supervised and damaged an artwork.
Tell me a bit about the landscape exhibition. Is landscape painting one of your personal favourites?
No, I think portraits are my personal favourites. I'm particularly interested in portraiture, which doesn't get a lot of showing, really. I mean, when you think of art club exhibitions, there's almost never a portrait in them. And these are the amateur but quite passionate painters. They don't seem to paint many people, as though people are perhaps a difficult subject than
You think
still lifes and gardens and
Goldie set the bar too high, did he?
Possibly, yes, yeah. Landscape is something that attracts a lot of artists, and I can see why, because the Wairarapa has beautiful landscape, and there's enormous skies, and when you're walking out into it, you want to keep what you're seeing. This is from a personal viewpoint. And I can see why people get sort of seduced by wanting to paint it. They want to capture that elusive thing that they're seeing, a certain slant of light and the colour and all of that, and the feel. Like we've got a Beth Sutherland painting which I look at and think, oh, you can just feel the wind blowing in that. It's so sort of lively, and there's something very attractive about it, I think. When you know that landscape is recording things about the changes in landscape, like the early surveyors and painters like Breeze and Heafy. They looked at the landscape in quite a different way to how later painters in the 19th century looked at it, when they were looking at the magnificent New Zealand scenery. You know, they got very excited about how majestic it was, and painted quite romantic sort of landscapes that looked at that sort of shock and awe kind of
Turner and Constable sort of thing.
Yes. Well, yes, they did that too, and of course the painters who came out here, European painters, they came from a background of that kind of romantic landscape tradition, and they looked at the New Zealand landscape and did the same sort of thing here. And it took a very long time, not until probably the 30s and 40s, did the local artists start looking at the landscape and trying to paint in a New Zealand way that wasn't infected by this European romanticism, etc. They wanted to find a New Zealand identity in their painting, so it was a different kind of attitude. And you look at people like Rita Angus, and I think Alan Curnow said something about when he thinks of the arts in New Zealand, he thinks of Lilburn's music, the Caxton Press, and Rita, he called her Rita Cook because that was her married name, Rita Cook's Otago landscapes. And they are a sort of quintessential modernist view of a New Zealand landscape, and it's quite different to what went before. And I'm not an expert in this sort of thing. I've never done art history at university, so I could be saying things that are quite wrong. But that's my view of how it has worked. And then, of course, it's changed from the 30s and 40s. There has been far stronger real New Zealand art, like Tos Williston, who only left the country for a couple of months. He painted New Zealand the whole time, the whole of his life, and wanted to take something out of the colours of the earth and the pigments of the earth and the way that his paintings look. And I always think his paintings look quite sort of muddy. But there is something that is essentially New Zealand about his paintings. We recognise them, we recognise the landscape.
Well, you've whetted our appetite. When does the exhibition of landscapes open?
The 25th of November, along with Petrus van der Velden. And that's partly why we have this show, is that Petrus van der Velden came out here from Holland in the 1880s, I think, the end of the 19th century anyway. And he was just blown away by the New Zealand landscape. And until that time, he'd been a painter of people, village life and interiors and people in Holland.
Like Peter Bruegel.
Yeah, a bit like that, but yes, that kind of thing. And when he came here, he was just so impressed that he started painting landscapes, and particularly the Otira Gorge area, and he's quite famous for those paintings of the Otira Gorge. And he sort of invested the landscape with much more emotion than painters of that period were doing. And that actually had an influence on people like McCann, who was very interested in Van der Velden and what he had produced. So we thought, when we got the Petrus Van der Velden exhibition, which is a Te Papa touring exhibition, it would be nice to have some of the landscapes in the collection out. That's where it came from.
Looking further ahead, we have an exhibition of Hepworth coming up. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Ah, yes. Well, that's just going to be a little show in the little gallery at the end of the main gallery, because the Hepworth is actually a really important piece in the collection, and at various times it has been suggested that we sell that to make money because it has no relevance here. Well, I would dispute that, because I think it has great relevance to the collection and to a particular time in New Zealand life when the art centre was first being pushed for. Like, there was a group of people in the community who really wanted to see an art gallery in Masterton. They thought that Masterton had come of age enough to have some of these kinds of cultural facilities, and they wanted an art gallery. And so they bought a Hepworth as the foundation piece in the collection, which was an amazing thing to do. Somebody knew of one at a very good price, and so they purchased it for 475 guineas was the purchase price, I think, 475, I think. And it was purchased long before there was an art gallery. So it was the first piece in the collection. But then you think about, well, why Hepworth? Why didn't they buy a New Zealand artist? People didn't rate New Zealand artists then. They wanted something from overseas by an artist that would be recognised here. This was the first place to have a Hepworth sculpture. Even Auckland Art Gallery didn't have one. They not long afterwards acquired Torso 2, and there was a huge kerfuffle about that because councillors were opposed to such a modern piece of art. It just didn't, they didn't understand it. They didn't understand Hepworth's position in the art world. And our one is actually quite significant because it's her first metal sculpture, and she went on to become a sculptor who worked in metal, huge bronze public commissions and all sorts of things that she did after our little galliard, which is a lovely copper sheet sculpture.
One last question. What would, in your opinion, be your favourite piece in the collection, in the Aratoi collection?
AJ. It's really hard to answer because I've got quite a lot of favourites. I'm very, I love printmaking because I've been a printmaker in a small way and would like to go back to it. So the prints are a part of the collection, and we have a good collection of prints that are a little window of the 70s printmaking world. I'd quite happily walk out with the Gladys Eastwood, actually. I do love that painting. And there are objects that I really am very fond of. But it's been a fantastic job to have working here, and I've learnt so much. And I can't really say that I have one specific thing or artwork over another, but they all matter quite deeply to me.
Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks.